I think the gospel sets up well something that I love whenever we're in a discussion. As a teacher, when we're hitting a topic, I love continuums. That you put 2 points down, these are your poles, and then you discuss things as it lives in that space of continuum. And that can be for anything. We use continuums to talk about mental health. We use continuums to talk about political preference. We use continuums to talk about fully God, fully man, where, spin the dial if you want. And then one of the other funny things about continuums is that they often bend around and meet each other on the back end. That people are really conservative about something in the church, for example, and people who are really progressive on something often have a couple opinions that overlap. I find continuums fascinating, and I think using that today will be very helpful for us as we discuss poverty and what I'm just going to call affluence, in terms of wealth, because most of us wouldn't posit ourselves into the wealth category, but some of that just has to do with the perspective of which we're looking. When I used to teach seniors at Lumen Christi in Jackson, we used to use this wealth indicator because I wanted them to understand something, that their very small experience of Jackson, Michigan, of about 35,000 people, well, the world's a little bigger than that, isn't it? And even here in Toledo, the world's a little bigger than that. So we took their wage that they earned, took someone with a part-time job, just a part-time job, and then came up with an annual income and then posited them in the world for where they found themselves on the world net worth. And it might surprise you that they found themselves in the top quarter of wage earners in the world at like $6.50 an hour, 20 hours a week. And then one of the more astute students said to me, put in the number for the federal poverty line. I'm just curious what we in this country call the line of poverty. Where would that posit them in the world? And I forget what it was then, but today it puts them in the top 16%. That a person at the federal poverty line, which is $12,840, I believe is what it is this year, that would still make you more wealthy than 84% of the world. And right, just put it into some context. I was joking last Mass about, I have a friend, when I used to coordinate military academy nominations, the guy from West Point, we've become good friends. And if you're watching Dave, hello. But Dave used to remind me, after knowing him for a while, that he was second from last in his graduating class at West Point. And he was kind of embarrassed. I'm like, Dave, second from last at West Point is still pretty darn impressive by most people's standards. That the starting point of that funnel is so small. So I think it is important that we posit ourselves on the continuum, right? That we understand where we fit. And then what it means for us, because our first reading and the psalm together are looking at where is the search for happiness? Where is it found? Jeremiah's pretty clear, not in humans. It just won't be found there. And in the psalm, that idea of like being rooted on the banks and making sure that what our roots are fed in is this living water. And that living water is not our possessions. Because if there's one thing that we've certainly learned in just reading a little bit of human history is all of the possessions, there's nothing inherently bad about them. Sometimes people misquote Paul in his letter and they say that money is the root of all evil. But that isn't what he said, is it? What did he say? The love of money is the root of all evil, right? That's such an important distinction. That all of our affluence, and by the way, I don't want to just talk about money today. We are affluent in our education. We're affluent depending on the audience that we're in. I'll give you a silly example. When I was studying theology as a scholastic, as an oblate, there was an oblate priest from Germany who was working on a doctorate. And he came to my door one day and said, I need a gerund for my homily. I'm about 29, 30 years old. And he said, I needed to talk to a native English speaker because I don't have this right. I need a gerund. And he said it 2 or 3 times. And each time I'm like, a what? Right? When you're a native speaker, even though we did all study that, you don't remember it. And so in that space, he was poor. He's a person of poverty. It's a second language to him, and he doesn't even know what it is he needs. And so he went to someone of affluence. A man with a degree. And a man who's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So we had to get out the dictionary, right? And so even in that moment, when you get out your continuum, and I'm very affluent, I'm very wealthy in English, but also in that space, I came to understand something. Because it's native to me, I had forgotten something important. And so I couldn't help him until I went back and acknowledged my own poverty. Pope Francis this week tweeted something. I don't know if he actually tweets, but someone tweeted for him. I just can't see him. I just can't. Sorry. Maybe. Sorry, Pope, if it's you. I love it. But he said, to this idea of the search for happiness, he said, get well, the meaning of life. And I want to give you an acronym to take with you this week, and it's CUB, as in a baby bear. C-U-B. So he said the meaning of life is coming to those who are suffering. Coming to those who are suffering and then understanding their need. Understanding their need and then bringing them relief. ING verbs, right? These are things of action, which is exactly the opposite of the first reading. That bush, it has no change of season. What's that bush rooted in the first reading? Lava. It's a very powerful image. And so if we start to say the meaning of life is to be coming to those that are suffering, and then to say, I need to understand them in their struggle, in their strife, in their suffering. I got to understand them. And then and only then can I bring relief. Well, that applies to all of it. The economic poverty, spiritual poverty, physical poverty. Think about all the ways this transcends. When you talk to someone, and as we get older, we begin to realize, I can't do all the things I used to do. I'm only 51, but my goodness, this is a cruel joke, God. You look at it and go, but all it is a poverty. And I've got to be able to say to those who have the affluence, can you help? But they can't help me if they don't come to me. Well, let me flip that though. You can go to, right? People sometimes demand. My oblate brother from Germany came to me and said, I need this. And that happens to us sometimes. The poor come to us. Hey, I need this help. But ideally, as Pope Francis was saying, the meaning of life is that we would go to them. That they shouldn't have to ask. That we are so rooted in this meaning of life that we would go to them, coming to them. We see that they're in need. So as I said, are we going to the elderly? Are we coming to them? Are we understanding them rather than saying, I know what you need? Because this happens a lot with economic poverty. People show up, particularly the people of the first world, they go into the developing countries, we know what you need. And they throw money at it and they don't understand that it's much more complicated than just economic resource. That's powerful, and we know it, but there's much more to it. And so that cycle just shows up over and over again. Someone struggling with depression or anxiety, we got to come to them. If we have to wait for them to come to us, they're losing a little bit of their dignity, aren't they? Hey, I hate to bother you. I know you're busy. I get that a lot as a priest, and I hate it. Particularly at the school. As the leader of the school, sometimes guys come and go, hey, Father, I hate to bother you. You are never bothering me to bring to me what you need. But as I said, you can't pull the three apart. Okay, you came to me, my forgiveness for not coming to you first, but let me understand your suffering, and then I can bring relief. That's what Jesus is getting at. Otherwise, there's no reason to say, blessed are the poor. Being poor is difficult. It's wretched. The affluence is comfort and power, whatever the space be. As I said, education or economic power. It all lives in that same space. But when we're honest with each other, it isn't either or, right? It isn't. It's not that I'm either poor or that I'm affluent. It's that I'm both of those things. I live in the first world. I have a bachelor's and 2 master's degrees now, and I still struggle with gerund, but in fact, I got it wrong at the first Mass this morning, so don't watch that homily. I got it wrong again. I'll never be poor in education. And even though I vowed poverty as an oblate, I'll never really be financially poor because I live in the first world. And actually just renouncing those things wouldn't serve God and God's people anyway. What serves God is if I really listen to what Pope Francis said. Can I come to them? Can I understand them? And then I can bring relief. Not because I'm the answer, but because the first 2 things were so important to come to them, to understand them, and then bring relief. Isn't that this Eucharist? It's Christ coming to us. He understands us because he lived it. He took flesh. That's the whole point of the incarnational theology. Without it, Gene and I were talking about this last week. What's the point of the incarnation if it isn't to teach us how to live? Teach us how to live. He comes to us, he understands us because he's walked this path. And then he brings us relief. And then he just says, go do the same. I retweeted the Pope with his coming understanding and bringing this relief. And I said, it's really simple. It's just hard to do, but it's simple to understand. So as we hear that first reading to say, hey, don't trust in humans, don't trust in the resources. They'll always let you down. And when they do, you run the risk of becoming bitter. Root yourself in the living water. And then you hear Jesus saying, blessed are these people. Why? Spoiler alert, we're all poor. We all have times when we can't laugh. We all have times when we've been ridiculed. But most of us also have other times as well, the times of goodness and laughter. And when we bring that together, when we let the continuum bend around on itself, then and only then will we find wholeness. When we admit we are both poor and wealthy. When we admit that all of those us in this community, all of us in the world, we're in this together. To say, I've got things I can come to people with, I can listen to them and understand them, and I can bring relief. Because I know when I'm feeling poor, that's what I need. And I know people that have met that for me, and that is rooted in this Eucharist, his presence to us today. There it is. As I said, it's simple. It's simple in one sense. But what will it cost you? Everything. It just costs you everything. That's all. And that, as I said, maybe where it gets scary for us. But it's simple. Coming to those in need, understanding their suffering, and then bringing relief. May God be praised.